Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Joy Learning TV.
Hello, hello, how do you do? Happy to see you, happy to meet you. Hello, hello, how do you do? Happy to see you all. Hello there. Welcome to Senior High School R here on Joy Learning. It is time for Literature in English, my learners. Call somebody. Send a text message, grab your books, stay glued to your set, and let's learn together. What are we learning today? And so for second years, we are still looking at our book, Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. By Emily Bronte. What are our objectives for today? By the end of today's lesson, we should be able to review the background of the writer, because as you are studying the book, if you have no idea about the person you're reading about, it gets to a point when you have challenges on the way. And so we are going to review the background of the writer, and then we will read chapter 1 and summarize Wuthering Heights. And so grab your books. I've taken my time to type out all the chapter 1. And so even if you are in mommy's car whilst you are following, wherever you are, you can still move along with us. Now on your screen is a picture of the person's book we are reading. And this is Emily. This is Emily. Who at all is Emily? So Emily Bronte was an English novelist and poet who wrote a single novel. And so it is just one book that Emily wrote. However, her book touched a lot of lives. And that is why even after she's been gone for years, we are still studying her book. And this book was published in the year 1847, a highly imaginative work of passion and hate. And so as we read along, you will see that the book Wuthering Heights has got a bit of passion, a bit of hate, set on the Yorkshire moors. Now, Emily Bronte in full, her name is Emily Jane Bronte. Emily Jane Bronte. Now, we could say that Emily has been captured as one of the greatest among her siblings. So there were 3 sisters, and she has been seen as the one who had a lot of literary skills in her, although they were all writers. But the record of her life is extremely meager. Now, a lot of things have not been said about her. And so if you delve much and you want to get to know more about her, it's not so, it's just small. However, she left a legacy. For she was silent and reserved, and left no correspondence of interest. And her single novel, which we are going to study, rather solves the mystery about her spiritual existence. Now, another thing worth noting about Emily's book is the fact that it received terrible reviews. When it was first published, yes, it received a lot of reviews that was not so encouraging. But did she give up? The book has been published. People kept on reading. People kept reviewing it. And hey, here we go today, even in Ghana, even in West Africa, studying Emily Bronte's book, Wuthering Heights. Now, she was born in July 1818 and England. So on the 30th of July, 1818, and died in 1848. Died on the 19th of December, 1848. And so this tells us that Emily lived for 30 years. She lived for 30 years. Died in 1848. But here we are in 2022, still studying her book. And so the book, I should say, it's quite intriguing, quite evolving, and so stay glued as we read and analyze. Now, after reading Wuthering Heights, like we did with second class citizen, there are some particular things that we had to look out for. And so I took my time to take you through all the elements of prose. Don't forget that. After reading this book, after reading chapter 1 today, we should be able to summarize the chapter 1. And also, we should be able to identify the setting in it, identify the characters, identify the major events, the plot of chapter 1, as well as the characters. What will all this do for us? It will help us when we get to analysis. So once we start analyzing the chapter by chapter or analyzing the characters, we will be able to get a proper understanding of what we are writing based on the elements of prose that we have studied. Are you ready to bounce along? Yes, I am ready. And so grab your book. If you don't have your book, don't worry. I've got everything here. We'll read along. And so we are looking at chapter 1. And we are starting today. And so let's go. Follow as I read. I have just returned from a visit to my landlord, the solitary neighbor that I should be troubled with. This is certainly a beautiful country in all England. I do not believe that I could have fixed on a situation so completely removed from the stir of society. And so there are some few things that I want us to do as we read today. Take note of all the unfamiliar words. Once we are done reading and we are working on the analysis and the summary, we should look at the meaning contextually. And so as used in the context, not just grabbing your dictionary after encountering any difficult word. Just underline and then we go. And so I am underlining the word stir. Circling stir. Completely removed from the stir of society. A perfect misanthropist heaven, and Mr. Heathcliff and I are such a suitable pair to divide the disillusion between us, a capital fellow. He little imagined how my heart warmed towards him when I beheld his black eyes withdrew so suspiciously under their brows as I rode up, and when his fingers sheltered themselves with a jealous resolution, still further in his waistcoat as I announced my name. What name was that? Let's go on. Mr. Heathcliff, I said. A nod was the answer. Mr. Lookwood, your new tenant, said. I do myself the honor of calling as soon as possible after my arrival, to express the hope that I have not inconvenienced you by my perseverance in soliciting the occupation of Treshgore's Grange. I heard yesterday you had had some thoughts. Treshgore's Grange is my own, sir, he interrupted, wincing. And so another word we are going to underline, I am going to underline, you can do same, is the word wincing. I've circled it. I I should not allow anyone to inconvenience me. If I could hinder it, walk in. The walk-in was uttered with closed teeth and expressed the sentiment, go to the deuce. Even the gate over, which he learned manifested no sympathizing movement to the words. And I think that circumstance determined me to accept the invitation. What invitation? I felt interested in a man who seemed more exaggeratedly reserved than myself. When he saw my horse breast fairly pushing the barrier, he did put out his hand to unchain it, and then sullenly preceded me up the causeway, calling as we entered the court, Joseph, take Mr. Lockwood's horse and bring up some wine. And so another word that we are going to circle is sullenly. Here, we have the whole establishment of domestics, I suppose, was a reflection suggested by this compound order. No wonder the grass grows up between the flax, and cattle are the only hedge cutters. Joseph was an elderly, nay, an old man, very old, perhaps, though hale and sinewy. And so I'm also going to circle the word sinewy and circle the word. What other word did they identify? Or they are all okay for you? Okay, let's also circle hale. The Lord help us. He soliloquized in an undertone of peevish displeasure, while relieving me of my hearth, looking meantime in my face so sorely that I charitably conjectured he must have need of divine aid to digest his dinner, and his pious ejaculation had no reference to my unexpected advent. Wuthering Heights is the name of Mr. Heathcliff's dwelling. Wuthering being a significant provincial adjective, descriptive of the atmospheric tumult to which is exposed in stormy weather. Chill, brazen ventilation they must have up there at all times. And so I'm sure so far in our reading you've encountered the word Wuthering Heights. That actually happens to be the title of the book of the prose we are looking at. Indeed, one may guess the power of the north wind blowing over the edge by the exercise slant of a few stunted firs at the end of the house, and by a range of gaunt stones all stretching their limbs one way, as if graven arms of the sun. Happily, the architect had foresight to build a trunk. The narrow windows are deeply set in the wall, and the corners defended with large jutting stones. And so jutting stones. Before passing the threshold, I paused to admire a quantity of grotesques carven lavished over the front, and especially about the principal door, above which, among a wilderness of crumbling griffins and shameless little boys, I detected the dates 1500, or you say 1500, and the name Hatton and Shaw. I would have made a few comments and requested a short history of the place from the surly owner, but his attitude at the door appeared to demand my speedy entrance or complete departure, and I had no desire to aggravate his impatience previous to inspecting the penetralium. One stop brought us into the family sitting room. Without any introductory lobby or passage, they call it here the house, preeminently. It includes kitchen and parlor, generally. But I believe at Wuthering Heights, the kitchen is forced to retreat altogether into another quarter. At least, I distinguished a hetter of tongues and a clatter of culinary utensils deep within, and I observed no signs of roasting, boiling, or baking about the huge fireplace, nor any glitter of copper saucepans and tin colanders on the walls. One end, indeed, reflected splendidly both light and heat from ranks of immense pewter dishes, interspersed with silver jugs and tankards towering row after row on a vast oak dresser to the very roof. The latter had never been underdrawn. Its entire anatomy lay bare to an inquiring eye, except for a frame of wood leaden with oat cakes and clusters of legs of beef, mutton, and ham concealed it. Above the chimney were sundry villainous old guns and a couple of horse pistols, and, by way of ornament, 3 goodly painted canisters disposed along its ledge. The floor was of smooth, white stone, the chairs high-backed, primitive structures, painted green. One or 2 heavy black ones lacking in the shade. In an arc under the dresser reposed a huge liver-colored bitch, paunted, surrounded by a swarm of squealing puppies and other dogs hunted other recesses. The apartment and furniture would have been nothing extraordinary as belonging to a homely northern farmer, with a stubborn countenance and stalwart limbs, set out to advantage in knee branches and gaiters. Such an individual seated in his armchair, his mug of ale frothing on the road able before him, is to be seen in any circuit of 5 or 6 miles among these hills. So another word that I've identified as ale and have circled it as well as frothing. If you go at the right time after dinner, but Mr. Heathcliff forms a singular contrast to his abode and style of living. He is a dark-skinned gypsy in aspects, in dress and manners a gentleman. That is, as much a gentleman as many a country square. Rather slovenly, perhaps, yet not looking amiss with his negligence, because he has an erect and handsome figure, and rather morose, okay? Possibly, some people might suspect him of a degree of underbred pride. I have a sympathetic chord within that tells me it is nothing of the sort. I know. By instinct, his reserve springs from an inversion to surely display of feeling, to manifestation of mutual kindliness. He will love and hate equally undercover, and esteem it a species of impertinence to be loved or hated again. And so another word here is impertinent. No, I'm running on too fast. I bestow my own attributes over liberally on him. Mr. Heathcliff may have entirely the similar reasons for keeping his hand out of the way when he meets a would-be acquaintance to those which accused me. Let me hope my constitution is almost peculiar. My dear mother used to say, I should never have a comfortable home. And only last summer, I proved myself perfectly unworthy of one. While enjoying a month of fine weather at the seacoast, I was thrown into the company of a most fascinating creature, a real goddess in my eyes. As long as she took notice of me, I never told my love vocally. Still, if looks have language, the merest idiots must have guessed I was over head and ears. She understood me at last and looked a return, the sweetest of all imaginable looks. And what did I do? I confess it with shame, shrunk eyes into myself like a snail. At every glance retired colder and farther, till finally the poor innocent was led to doubt her own senses. Hello learners, how is it going so far? Don't forget we are looking at chapter 1 of Wuthering Heights. If you just joined, grab your book and let's move on. And overwhelmed with confusion at her supposed mistake, persuaded her mama to the camp. By this curious turn of disposition, I have gained the reputation of deliberate heartlessness. How undeserved, I alone can appreciate. I took a seat at the end of the headstone opposite that towards which my landlord advanced. I hope you've noted down the name of the landlord. And filled up an interval of silence by attempting to caress the Canaan mother, who had left her nursery and was sneaking wolfishly to the back of my legs, her lips curled up and her white teeth watering for a snatch. My caress provoked a long guttural snare, and so another word that I have identified is wolfishly. Guttering. You'd better let the dog alone, growled Mr. Heathcliff in unison, checking fiercer demonstrations with a punch of his foot. She's not accustomed to be spoiled, not kept for a pet. Then, striding to a side door, he shouted again, Joseph! And so another word is striding. Joseph mumbled indistinctly in the depth of the cellar, but gave no intimation of ascending. So his master dived down to him, leaving me vis-a-vis the raveling bitch and a pair of grim shaggy sheepdogs who shared with her a jealous guardianship over all my movements. And so another word to take note of is wrathfully. Not anxious to come in contact with their fangs, I sat. But imagining they would scarcely understand tacit insults, I unfortunately indulged in winking and making faces at the trio, and some 10 of my physiognomy so irritated Madame that she suddenly broke into a fury and leapt on my knees. I flung her back and hastened to interpose the table between us. This proceeding aroused the whole hive, half a dozen four-footed friends of various sizes and ages, youth and coat-lapped peculiar subject of assault, and parrying of the larger combatants as effectually as I could with a poker. I was constrained to demand aloud assistance from some of the household in re-establishing peace. Mr. Heathcliff and his man climbed the cellar steps with vexatious phlegm, though the head was an absolute tempest of roaring and yelping. Happily, an inhabitant of the kitchen made more dispatch, a lusty dame with tagged up gown midst of us flourishing a frying pan, and used that weapon and her tongue to such purpose that the storm subsided magically and she only remained heaving like a sea after a high wind. "What the devil is the matter?" he asked, eyeing me in a manner that I could ill endure. After this inhospitable treatment, what the devil indeed, I muttered. Could have had no worse spirit in them than those animals of yours, sir. You might as well leave a stranger with a brood of tigers. They won't meddle with persons who thought nothing. He raised table. The dogs do right to be vigilant. Take a glass of wine. No, thank you. Not bitten, are you? Heathcliff's countenance relaxed into a grin. Come, come, he said. You are flurried, Mr. Lockwood. Here, take a little wine. I and my dogs, I am willing to own, hardly know how to receive them. Your health, sir. I bowed and returned the pledge, beginning to pay for the misbehavior of a pack of curs. Beside, I felt loath to yield the fellow further amusement at my expense, since his humor took that turn of the folly of offending a good tenant. Relaxed a little in the laconic style of chipping off his pronouns and auxiliary verbs. An interest to me, a discourse on the advantage and disadvantages of my present place of retirement. I found him very intelligent on the topics we touched, and before I went home, I was encouraged so far as to follow more rule. He evidently wished no repetition of my intrusion. I shall go, notwithstanding. It is astonishing how sociable I feel myself. Lo, too soon we are done with chapter 1. Write your own summary down and show it to whoever is by you. It can be mommy, it can be your brother or your sister. And so do that before I also present my summary of what we've read. Are you noting down something? Well done. Now, with all the pages that we've read in chapter 1, and so Wuthering Heights, the first chapter opens with Mr. Lockwood. Now take note of the names because we will identify the characters that played a role in the first chapter. Wuthering Heights, writing in his diary about his visit to his landlord. Mr. Heathcliff, and so another name pops up, and that is what? Another character. While entering a picture of what Wuthering Heights actually stood for, and so you will tell me at the end of this. While entering Wuthering Heights, Lockwood notices but does not comment upon the date 1500 and the name. Now Lockwood, an unwelcome guest, soon meets Joseph, a servant, and a pack of dogs that have overrun the farmhouse. Although he receives no encouragement from his host. Now, I've just given you a summary of what we just read in chapter 1. Did you also identify the same thing in your reading? Okay, and so a whole idea, the whole things we can gather from chapter 1 is what? At where? Church goes wrong. Now, we got to know when we're looking at elements of prose that we have what we call characters. In a literary work. And here, one of the first characters that we can make notes down is Mr. Lockwood. Don't forget. A new tenant at Treasurer's Ground. Now, the idea of a new tenant at Treasurer's Ground, what comes into mind? Okay? Okay? Well done. In our lesson, that certain is the time, the place, and the cultural background. And so the place in this prose that has been exposed to us now is Treasurer's Ground, which falls into certain. Now, we all Cliff for short. So Mr. Heathcliff, Mr. Heathcliff. There is another character that comes into play in chapter 1. And who is that? Joseph. And so Lockwood, a servant. And so we see Joseph here playing the role of a servant. And a pack of dogs. You shouldn't forget that in our exposition to the element of prose, we learned that not only human beings, it could be animals. If you remember, I mentioned that. It could even be tables. It could be trees. It could be anything that plays a role. And the dogs are also playing a role in chapter 1. Although he receives no encouragement from his host, Lockwood decides to make a return. Okay. And so we have seen the characters that played a role in chapter 1. Let's mention them. So there is Joseph. There is who else? There is Heathcliff. There are the dogs. And then the last one. Who is the last character? Heathcliff. Heathcliff. There is Heathcliff also here. Now, in our next chapter, note those assignments down as we go on to now look at the plots, the development of events in chapter 1. Before we look at the development, note down the assignment for today. You are to analyze chapter 1 of the prose, Wuthering Heights, by Emily Bronte. You are to analyze chapter 1 of the prose. Now let's come down. We've been able to identify the characters in chapter 1. We've also seen a portion of the setting. Now let's take time and look at the plots. Don't forget, when we mention plots, we are looking at the sequence of events. So how did the events unfold in Wuthering Heights? Okay. Are you noting down something? How the events unfolded? Okay. How did the events unfold? Good. And so the first event that we saw was the entering of who? So we see here, I have just returned from a visit to my landlord, the solitary neighbor that I shall be troubled with. A solitary neighbor that I shall be troubled with. This is certainly a beautiful country in all England. I do not believe that I could have fixed on a situation so completely removed from the stir of society. And so the first event we see is the return of this character from the landlord. And we saw this character. And so when we finished reading, I took you through the summary and we saw that okay, good. So we saw Lookwood writing in his diary. And so Lookwood had returned from his landlord. When we just went back to look at the pages, the first opening of the book Wuthering Heights, Lookwood was making reference to returning from where? His landlord. And then the scene after we got to that part, he grabbed his diary to write in. And so if we're looking at the sequential events, how the events actually unfolded, then we are seeing that Lookwood returns. We also see that he writes in his diary. And then what else do we see? What else you see there? Notice down. Good. I've got the best learners so far. Now we are done with chapter 1. We've looked at the summary. And we are taking turns to look at the elements of prose in the chapter 1. We have taken the characters, and we've seen some characters who are in here. So we saw who? Good job, Mr. Lookwood. We also saw who? Mr. Heathcliff. And then we saw who? We saw Joseph. And then the dogs. So these are the main characters that we saw in the chapter 1 that we read. Now the next thing we are going to do is look at the role they played to the development of this chapter. What role did Mr. Lookwood play to the development? Now let's go back to your books, and so pick your books. As I go back to the pages of Wuthering Heights. Good. All right. And so we've seen the arrival of Lookwood from the landlord. And who is this landlord? Heathcliff. Heathcliff. And so if we are looking at the plot of chapter 1, we see the arrival of Lookwood from Heathcliff, sitting somewhere to write in his diary about his encounter with Heathcliff. And so we get it here. Now just take your time and look, and you understand the issues that unfolded in chapter 1. I've just returned from a visit to my landlord. And who is this landlord? Heathcliff. Look at how Lockwood described the landlord. The solitary neighbor that I shall be troubled with. The solitary neighbor that I shall be troubled with. This is certainly a beautiful country. And so based on his encounter with his landlord, now he sits down to write. Take account. And so with the plot, the first incident we see is arrival of Lookwood back to sit in his chair to reminisce about his encounter with his landlord and how he sees England. Now look at how he describes Heathcliff. A perfect misanthropist heaven. And Mr. Heathcliff and I are such a suitable pair to divide the disillusion between us. And so in our reading, we didn't identify disillusion. Note all these words that we've circled or noted down. Write it. You've just underlined in your books, but write them down so that before our next lesson, when we try to really analyze the issues in chapter 1, you will be able to flow along. Now, he's still describing his landlord. So he describes him as what? A capital fellow. And he goes on. He little imagined how my heart warmed towards him when I beheld his black eyes, which rose so suspiciously under their brows as I rode up. And so all these ideas that we are seeing is Lockwood's account of his encounter with his landlord. And who is this landlord? Note it down. Now listen to how he spoke. Mr. Heathcliff, I said, and nod was the answer. Mr. Lockwood, your new tenant. So you've seen the tenant here. And so if we are assigning roles to our characters, we see that Mr. Heathcliff is who? The landlord. Then Mr. Lockwood is what? A tenant. There was another character that we came into contact getting to the latter part of chapter 1. Who was that character? Joseph. Well done. And what do we associate with Joseph? Joseph was described as a servant. Now, what are the things that Joseph said or did in the prose that can really tell us the nature of his character? Don't forget that if you want to really analyze and talk about a character, you can know the character and talk about the character based on what he says and what he or she does, and what other people say about him. What he says, what he does, and what other people will say about him. So based on these three things, you can't really talk and talk about a character through analysis. Now Lockwood, listen to his utterances. I do myself the honor of calling as soon as possible after my arrival, to express the hope that I have not inconvenienced you by the perseverance in soliciting the occupation of Trashgrow's Grange. And where is Trashgrow's Grange? We noted that Trashgrow's Grange comes in the setting, and that is the place. Now, the setting is not just the place. So based on all that we've read so far, What time of the day, what time can we ascribe or associate chapter 1 to? Okay? I know you are thinking about the time. Share with me by writing it on your paper and showing it to whoever is by you. Great. And so you can picture the time as midday, around midday. Around midday. And so the place is Treasured Ground in England. The time is around midday. Now, we want to come and talk about the character Lockwood. The character Lockwood. Now, what do you think about the character Lockwood? What do you think about the character Lockwood? What do you think about the character Lockwood? What do you think about the character? All right. Now you can know him based on the things that he said in chapter 1. And so we can say that he's what? Outspoken, determined, faces people because he was able to face his landlord and interact with him head on. What more can you say about him? He's an explorer, ready to explore, because just arriving in England, he's gone to see his landlord, and now he's taking stock, taking accounts. We can also say that he's a writer, because those who write take account of their day-to-day events, based on what we see that in the summary, that he is a new tenant at Treasured Ground, writing in his diary. That gives us what? An idea about who he is. In our next lesson, today we've just read. Don't forget our objective for today was to do what? To have a review of the author of the book, Emily Bronte, and then read chapter 1 and summarize it. That was the target we set for ourselves today. I'm sure you read along. How did the reading go? You can, now that we've done a general reading, you can just relax in your bed after the lesson and then fish out the meanings of all the words that we identified. We have also seen the characters that played a role in the chapter 1. We saw Mr. Lockwood, a tenant. We saw Mr. Heathcliff, a landlord, and then there was another character mentioned. Joseph was mentioned as a servant. However, the role of Joseph was not really captured. I'm sure in the subsequent chapters, we will come into contact with Joseph and know more about him. Well done, my learners. I'm sure you've already written down the assignments that I gave you. I said today you have to analyze the chapter 1 of Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. Note down all your questions and send them to Joy Learning channel, and we will gladly answer you. We've come to the end of today's lesson, but I'll not leave without leaving you a word. And so, like I said, the last time, focus is the leg to the top. And so whatever you are doing, even as we are reading, we've started a new book. If you don't read, you can't get to the top. If you don't read, when we start looking at the past questions that relate to this book, you will not be able to answer. Focus is the leg to the top. Keep it firm. Until we meet again, it's been Senior High School R here on Joy Learning Channel with with your teacher, Juma Larbi. Enjoy the rest of the day and stay blessed. Bye-bye.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Joy Learning TV.